Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jenny Charles, and I'm the current president of the Women's Political Collaborative of Tennessee. And today we have a program for Sexual Assault Awareness Month called Working with Sexual Assault Survivors in Tennessee Legal System. Our board member, Heather Michelle, has put together what I think is going to be a very unique and impactful program. Heather has a background in advocacy that includes work with the Sexual Assault Center of Middle Tennessee as a sexual assault response team coordinator, where she collaborated with police, nurses, prosecutors, advocates to help 4 counties formalize protocols on how to respond to sexual assault. Prior to that, Heather worked at the Tennessee Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence as the Director of Advocacy. Heather has her law degree and also holds a degree in sociology from Middle Tennessee State University. Her current position is working as a lobbyist focusing on nonprofit interest. And before I hand it over to Heather to introduce our panel, I'd like to encourage everyone on the program who is not a member to join by visiting our website. The WPC is constantly offering CLE accredited programs, and next month in May, on May 19th at noon, we're going to be offering dual credit. We all know how difficult that is to come by, for our program on restorative justice in the criminal justice system. In that program, we're also going to be hearing from a rape survivor who has a very interesting story to tell about restorative justice. I've worked in the criminal justice system for a long time, and I have never seen anything like this. So please be on the lookout for our flyers and materials for the Thursday, May 19th program. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Heather for our program. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny, and thanks to everyone who's joining us today for the April Sexual Assault Awareness Program on working with sexual assault survivors in Tennessee's legal system. I'm really excited about today's conversation, as I have worked with all 3 women on this panel and know firsthand their experience and commitment to this work. I'm going to give you a quick overview of the framework for today's program. I'm actually going to introduce the panel a little bit later. I'm first going to do a brief overview of a few bills from the legislative session that might impact your work with sexual assault survivors. Questions, I think, can be dropped in the chat box. Is that correct, Jenny? And then we will save a few minutes at the end if anybody has questions for our panelists. So many of you may know that yesterday the legislature sine died and the 112th General Assembly came to a close. There were a total of about 3,590 bills introduced for the 2-year session. We're just going to go over a few bills that impact sexual assault survivors. So the first one I'd like to mention, the Jim Coley Rape Survivor Protection Act. This bill really looked at our rape kit tracking system and made some changes to shorten the time frame for which law enforcement has to collect rape kits from the medical providers to 7 days. It also shortens the time frame for which law enforcement agencies must submit those sexual assault kits to TBI from 60 days to now 45 days. It increased, this was a big one, the big part of the bill, was that it increased the hold kit. We used to only store a hold kit, an anonymous rape kit, for 3 years, and now we've extended that to 10 years for a rape kit. And this also requires TBI to develop and implement an electronic tracking system to track the location and lab status of each sexual assault kit released to law enforcement. So all of that will go into effect after July 2021. And you can think of that as like a UPS tracking system where they're going to be scanning, you're going to have a number that's identifiable. Theoretically, victims of sexual assault who have kits could log in and see the status of their rape kit and track that process. So that was passed by Bob Freeman and Senator Bell, and that was the Sexual Assault Center's priority legislation. The second one to look at is the governor's omnibus human sex trafficking bill. And this was the big one this year that the governor pushed. They also brought in Tim Tebow and his organization. They're doing a lot to focus on human trafficking and funneling resources into that. This one changes the age from which a victim can testify in a criminal case via two-way circuit television. So previously it was 13 or under. Now, if you're 18 years or under and you're a victim, you are able to testify by court order via two-way closed circuit. It also permits medical representatives, human trafficking representatives on the local CPIT teams, that's your child protective investigative teams. These groups originally weren't authorized under statute to participate in CPIT, so it was just kind of making sure they had access to those meetings. And it also added criminal exploitation of a minor and human trafficking as offenses for which one can seek an order of protection. Price tag on this one was pretty hefty, is about $1 million total, a lot of recurring funding. When you look at the year as a whole, the legislature dropped about 5.5 million into human sex trafficking this year. Another big one that passed in the last 2 years was victims restitution by Representative Doggett and Senator Stevens. This changed the allocation formula for monies paid into court matters to first be credited towards the payment of restitution owed to the victim. So it bumped them up to number one. Once that restitution was paid in full, the next monies could be credited towards payment of litigation taxes, payment of costs, etc. But it took victims and put them at the top of the list for restitution. There are, some rumors of potential special session this year, and I'll be the first to tell you I'm quite tired of special sessions. But if there is a class injunction by the court for a sex offender registry matter that we have going on, that could potentially cause the legislature to come back in for a special session. Right now, there's a lot of court litigation in Michigan and in the Sixth Circuit on the sex offender registry. So there's the potential that if the court makes a ruling before the next session, that we will go back in to address some of those concerns. Other bills that were passed aimed at removing probation for continued child sexual abuse, removal of parental rights if a child were conceived by rape. There was also a grant program established within the District Attorney General's office to allocate funding to local governments to help create safe meeting spaces for victims when they're meeting with attorneys, law enforcement, and counselors. So overall, our firm tracked about 288 bills on sexual assault related legislation. There are a lot of changes. As many of you know, being attorneys, the best place to get the most updated version of all those changes is the TCA. So I flew through that pretty quick. I'm excited to introduce you to our panel. If anybody has questions about any of those bills or legislation, just drop them in the chat and we can address that in the end. Again, a lot of changes, a lot of focus on human trafficking and removal of probation, things like that. So our panelists all have direct experience working with survivors in the legal system, or as Mindy's case, being a criminalized survivor in the Tennessee system. So I'm very excited to hear some of their perspective and hope that it will be helpful to you all as attorneys. I'll first start with Kelly Peters. She is the Director of Advocacy in the Sexual Assault Forensic Exam, the SAFE Clinic. She also oversees the statewide sexual assault crisis line for the Sexual Assault Center. Kelly's been working with victims of sexual assault for over 20 years in East and Middle Tennessee. Betsy Mangrum is the LAV attorney for the Tennessee Coalition Sexual Assault Legal Clinic, where she assists clients statewide in the areas of order of protection, employment, housing, Title IX, criminal support, and family matters. Previously, Betsy worked as an advocate to serve and support victim survivors at the Sexual Assault Center. While at the Sexual Assault Center, she was a SART coordinator and a PREA advocate for local Middle Tennessee facilities. And then Mindy Dodd is a survivor of child sexual abuse, a recent clemency recipient from Governor Bill Lee. Mindy spent 21 years behind bars for the murder of her husband, despite her claims of innocence. And Mindy is an example of a criminalized survivor, and since being released, hopes to advocate and give voice to other survivors in these situations. So thank you all for being here. Look forward to this conversation. So the first question will be for all of you guys, and if you can unmute yourselves to participate, it'll be casual conversation. If someone says something that you know prompts a thought, or you want to interject and add something, please do it anytime. The first question I have for all of you, from your particular experience, what do you believe survivors of sexual violence in the legal system need the most? And we can start with Betsy. You want to go ahead?
I would say support from all different angles. Going through the legal system as a survivor, whether it be a civil road or a criminal road, just knowing it's going to be a long road, and having support, whether it's mental or some financial support where they're in a safe housing. I believe that's the most crucial, because it actually helps them get through that process. So many people drop out because it's just not, they're not getting answers, it's taking too long, and it's a toll on their health. So I believe support on all different areas is what's crucial to have a successful run at pursuing a criminal or civil case.
Yeah, and I'd agree with Betsy. Depending on if you're going civil or criminal, it does take a while. And so making sure that the victims that you're working with understand that this isn't a quick process and it does take a while. And just being in contact with them, or being in contact with an advocate or law enforcement, so that everyone's aware of where you are in the process. Because I think sometimes, like Betsy said, people will drop off just because it takes so long. And they just need that extra support and understanding of kind of what's going on at each different part within the system.
Thank you. Mindy, do you have anything to add as far as what you think survivors in the legal system need the most?
I think that they need to know that someone is there to help them, and that, you know, that they can feel free to reach out to someone.
Absolutely. And Mindy, I'm also gonna ask you a few questions about your story here and give us a minute to kind of dig into that as a criminalized survivor. But first, want to just acknowledge the importance of your voice on this matter as well. I think it's important for the legal community and the advocacy community at large to acknowledge that victims are on both sides of the legal system, especially when considering the sexual assault to prison pipeline, and just really grateful for your continued voice on the matter. Would you mind just sharing a little bit about your experience as a survivor of sexual abuse within the legal system within 21 years of being incarcerated?
I wouldn't mind at all. I advocated for myself once I realized that I was the only one that could truly tell what happened with me and my circumstances. So over the years, I have wrote thousands of letters to lawyers, organizations, etc., over the course of almost 20 years. And I even, reached out to specific people that specialized in sexual abuse cases to be told, no, sorry, I can't help you. But that's when I began to prepare for my clemency. But over the years, I was just searching for support.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about your relationship with the attorneys who worked on your case while you were in the system?
Well, in the beginning, I spoke with them on a weekly checked-in and we talked, but I wish that, let's see, my relationship, he had asked me questions that I could answer. The abuse was discussed several times, and he was going to use that in my trial along with professional testimony. But at some point, my lawyer said that he didn't want it to seem like with the abuse, it would be a poor, pitiful me act when I spoke of the abuse by others as well. So with that being said, he prepared a defense, but at the same time, he never used it.
Yeah, that was one of the things that kind of baffled me when researching and working on your clemency case. Was the only mention of your abuse was that it wasn't a part of the defense because you were claiming innocence, a claim that you're still pursuing today through the exoneration process. But I'm curious, you said that you and your attorneys talked about it. Was there any kind of support or sense of not urgency, but commitment to that? Because the abuse was a huge part of your story. So did you feel as if it was given the attention that it was needed, or it was kind of just a secondary thought?
I really don't think it did get the attention that it needed, because in my eyes, yes, that was a part of my thing and I was abused and that was wrong. But instead of preparing me for how the trial may go and how the district attorneys may approach me on the situation, I feel like he should have let me know that this is my life and it needed to be told because it was wrong.
Yeah, I hear you. Did you feel like you had a choice in whether or not your abuse was, as a part of your defense, or whether it was shared, or how it was shared? Did you have any kind of autonomy in that decision?
Well, all he kept telling me, I was going to get on the stand and testify, but at the same time, all he kept telling me is the DA is going to really run you through it. He's just going to run you through it. So me never being in trouble before, I didn't understand what he meant by that. So when I chose not to testify, I didn't realize that there was not going to be any defense on my behalf. He said, being as I didn't testify, that no one could.
Okay. That sounds very difficult. And like you could have had maybe a little bit more information about the not moving forward with testifying meant that your story wouldn't have been shared to the full extent. I do want to bring in the service providers here too, as they work with some victims, preparing them for court, or at least through the advocacy process as court is getting ready and you're getting ready for that litigation. Kelly and Betsy, can you tell us a little bit about the organizations that you work with and what your roles specifically are in supporting survivors with your orgs?
Kelly, do you want to go first or you want me? I'll go first. So I work with the Tennessee Coalition. It's statewide. I work under a federal grant called the Legal Assistance for Victims Grant. So we serve survivors of sexual assault, domestic violence, and stalking 11 years and up. I think Heather already spoke about the practice areas. The ones that I see the most are orders of protection, our criminal court support. So trying to prepare clients for court and just going through this process, that was your question originally, correct? Okay. First, just figuring out which way they're going to go. If they're just seeking an OP, if they're actually wanting to go through the criminal case, because we try to give the victims, the survivors, as much choice as they want in the matter, because it's their story, it's their path. So if they don't want to pursue charges, we respect that. If they just want to order a protection, we respect that too. Trying also, kind of like Mindy said, trying, if we know the attorneys, if we know the DAs on the side, trying to work with them as much as possible in collaboration, getting them comfortable with what a courtroom looks like. And the biggest thing for me is trying to only have to get them to tell their story as much as they have to, unless they want to. I believe some of the healing process that can come from this from the hard legal system is they get to tell their story. And if that's a part of their healing, then, go for it. Tell them. Mindy, I feel like you kind of wanted to do that and you didn't get the chance. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Kelly, do you want to talk about your role in the org and how you support victims as well?
Sure. So I'm with the Sexual Assault Center. So we have the SAFE clinic. So if anybody has been, anyone that's been sexually assaulted within the last 120 hours can come to the clinic and get the medical legal exam. We also, as soon as they come in, there's an advocate here 24/7, and we talk to them about their options. And, a lot of times victims will ask, well, what does it look like if I report versus what does it look like if I don't report? And if I don't report now, can I come back and report later on? And so we give them all of that information. We also give them the information with the understanding and fullest transparency as possible of this could be a long process. If you're having a kit done and you're wanting to report to law enforcement, it can be years before your kit comes back. So this can be a long process. And we let them know what all of that looks like up front so that they can make an informed choice of what they want to do. At that point, if they want to report to law enforcement, we have advocates here that are with them when they meet with law enforcement. If once law enforcement takes it to the DA's office, the advocates work with the victim witness coordinators at the DA's office. And so that while we're working with the victim on everything from housing to financial support, through the order protection process and all of that, we're also working with them on the criminal side of it. And so we're helping them work and manage with the victim witness coordinator so that there's a soft handoff, as it might be, because primarily the advocate is going to be that one primary support person through the entire process that they have. But then once it comes time to have the district attorney's office, or when we need to use the Tennessee Coalition, we need Betsy services, we'll work with Betsy's office as well, so that there's always that constant person that's aware of what's going on, and so that we can also help the victim understand what's going on through the entire process. And just making sure that there's the warm transfers and that they're getting that support and the knowledge of what's going on. A lot of times there's a lot of legal jargon thrown around, and victims aren't sure what's going on, or they go to court and stuff happens and they have no idea what just happened in court. And the attorneys are, well, it's been passed till, 3 months from now, we're going to hear it again. Then this is what's going to happen now. And there's not a lot of explaining all the time. And so we're usually there to help, explain what just happened in court, because it all is a lot of legal jargon that most people don't know what everything means, including myself most of the time. And then I call Betsy.
Yeah, it seems like victims and survivors working throughout the system definitely benefit with having advocates from your organizations. I know, Betsy, you were saying you do OPs and you're working with, and I think you guys do victims compensation claims
We
as
do.
well. Do you all, and Kelly, you all work with victims who come in to the sexual assault center for rape kits? Do you also partner with, we have several attorneys on the call, if they're working with survivors in any capacity on either side, civil, criminal, they refer their clients to you all for some of these services? Can they get the therapy services? Can they get the criminal advocate services if they're reaching out to you all and they already have an attorney?
Yeah, absolutely. We can also help them with their victims' compensation. We do have about 24 therapists within our agency as well. So we do have the therapy services. Yeah, absolutely. They can refer to us. We just need a little bit of information and we can just pick up and help out in any way that we can.
Same for us. I have multiple clients who, due to their assault or due to some sort of DV, they have cases in multiple courts. So someone will have a criminal case going on, an OP case, a divorce, or child custody. And under my grant, I can only handle some of those. So I'm kind of restricted. So they'll have a private attorney for this, or they'll have, me for this case. What we also can do is do low bono, which I'm pretty sure like every attorney on here is like, no. But it's a great service. If it doesn't fit under our grant or our numbers are messed up, then we look for those low bono or pro bono attorneys who would possibly handle one of these cases. So, or if that private attorney is like, hey, this isn't my wheelhouse, how about you go talk to the coalition? They seem to be pretty knowledgeable in this. So I would urge y'all to think about that.
We touched on therapy, and it's a good segue because the next question is about emotional and mental health as these attorneys are working with survivors in the system. I'm a little skeptical or nervous to even ask Mindy if there was any kind of services or therapy or mental health. I'm doubting that you had any of that on the inside after being convicted, but was there anything like that along the way that was helping you process a lot of this trauma, or was that left for you to find for yourself once you're on the inside?
Basically, after my interview with Dr. Keith Caruso and before my trial, a comment that he made, I just closed up and felt like there was no one that was willing to be genuinely sincere without me feeling like they're trying to trip me up to admit something that I didn't do. So
Right.
basically, I've dealt with it all these years on my own accord.
Yeah, I can see how that would feel tricky too, if you're looking for space to maybe process and heal from some of this, but you've got all this legal strategy around you, so there's not really a safe place to do that type of work.
Yes.
It's unfortunate to hear that. I hope that now that you're on the outside or while you're on the inside, you were able to find some space to do some of that healing and kind of process what you went through.
Well, I know that I've had a lot of help from the Free Hearts the Free Hearts Advocates and the Love and Justice Project, because I mean, they've just been awesome.
That's awesome. I'm so glad that there were orgs helping you while you were.
Yes, they've listened to me, they've talked to me, and just, it's been awesome.
And then those two organizations that she's referring to, Free Hearts is here in Nashville. They work with incarcerated women, and the Love and Justice Project is a spinoff from Free Hearts that focused on the criminalization of survivors, domestic violence, and sexual assault. And they do a letter writing campaign. They do a commissary fund to help survivors. And you would recommend those two organizations to other people who are incarcerated or in the process, the legal process, to help work through some of that?
Yes, most definitely.
I'm so glad.
They're very compassionate, and I mean, they're very supportive, very compassionate, and they genuinely and truly do care about you.
Good. I'm glad to hear that they were there for you. I know that a big part of the emotional mental health you guys touched on, Sexual Assault Center has several therapists. Can you talk a little bit about, there's a PREA program, there's a hotline that you work with, Kelly. I'm not sure if you guys take PREA calls or therapy calls in the coalition. I'm not for sure what programs you have anymore. Can y'all talk a little bit about the emotional and mental health services that you provide and what the attorneys can use if they're finding themselves with sexual assault survivors who need to facilitate some healing and process some of that trauma?
Sure. So we also run the statewide sexual assault crisis line out of our office. And we have the majority of the local prisons and jails across the state have our hotline number listed as the PREA number. And so PREA is the Prison Rape Elimination Act. And so each prison and jail has to have a number that they can call to get help and report that something has occurred while being in the prison system. And so we get those calls and we have an advocate. Betsy actually used to be the one that was our PREA person, but we have an advocate that handles all the PREA compliance issues and complaints that come through the hotline. And she works with the PREA individuals at all of the jails to let them know what's going on, what we're getting information of, and helping make sure that the individuals that are calling us are getting the services that they need. We also have a first responders program through our therapy department. So because we have such a large wait list, we have a first responders program that when you first call, if you meet certain criteria, so basically anybody that comes immediately through the clinic is eligible, that they can go through the first responders program, which is about 16 sessions with one of the therapists. And then if you need services longer than that, then you'll be transferred to one of what we call the long-term therapists. So we do have immediate crisis counseling, and then the first responders program, and then can go into more long-term counseling services.
Just to piggyback off of that, when I worked at SAC, that was the most frustrating part of my job because it's overwhelming and there's not a lot of resources and not a lot of funds. And I know it's Prison Rape Elimination Act, but it includes also incarcerated persons who are victims, who are survivors. So it doesn't have to happen while you're incarcerated. If you're coming in and you have a past about it and, being in the situation that you are, it's overwhelming and you should be able to access services. There should be mental health. There should be someone to talk to. And I know for some of the prisons, getting to a phone and having the privacy to speak about those things is really difficult. So I think there's a lot of work to be done there. It's a bigger problem to solve and to talk about it. I lose my mind just kind of thinking about it, but I just wanted to point that out too.
Yeah, I don't think I even realized that the chat line was for any kind of sexual trauma, even outside of the prison system. I think, I worked at the sexual assault center with you guys. I heard you talking about it, but I think in my mind, it was even limited to people who were assaulted inside the jails or prisons. So I'm surprised to hear that. And I bet a lot of people aren't aware that they can just call that just for any kind of healing and trauma work, that it doesn't have to be something that resulted from inside the system. Kelly is going to drop that crisis line number in the chat. Oh, I see it. She just did it there. For everyone, if there's anybody who wants to jot that down, if you're working with anyone in the legal system, going through trial, preparing for trial, someone who's already incarcerated, maybe doing post-conviction work, wherever they are in the process, that's a good number. And can we also drop the PREA hotline number in there as well? I'm sure that could also be, you can look that up as well.
So it's the same number.
Oh, that's the same number. Okay,
Mhm.
perfect. Yeah, I didn't realize it was, and I'm sure you're like overwhelmed with that number that I'm telling other people, like, use it. Here you go. It's there. They're professionals waiting to help people all across the spectrum of where they fall in the legal system. So that's a misconception that I had, was that it was often for people who weren't in the legal system or who hadn't gone through, who hadn't finished and been convicted, but it seems like it's pretty open as far as the survivors that you're helping across the spectrum. Okay, we talked a little bit. My next question was what protections or systems are in place. So we talked a lot about the rape kit tracking system. I think someone asked a question earlier that, yeah, Regina, the Jim Coley Rape Protection Survivors Act that goes into effect of July of 2021. TBI, I'm not sure if they've implemented any of those things. I know they were mandated to develop them, so I'm not sure exactly when those will be going into effect, but they should be working on something like that.
We have a meeting next Tuesday to all learn how to do the tracking system.
And I knew one of you would know that. And that's exciting. Is it going to be an online portal, or do you have any idea of what that will look like?
Yeah, it'll be an online portal. So once the exam is done, we'll upload the information into the system. And then when law enforcement picks it up, they'll update that they have it. And then once it goes to the crime lab, they will update it that now it's at the crime lab. And then the crime lab will update where it is in the system for being processed, if anything has been identified. And then once it's done, essentially the results, or as much of the results that they can release before the DA makes the final decision on prosecution or not.
Awesome. And so a lot of developments to the rape kit process, but a lot of information being shared and access. And I think that's very empowering for victims to be able to log in and see where their kit is in the process and not have to just guess or wait years without knowing what's happening. So I'm happy to hear that that's giving them some information. Betsy, could you talk just a little bit about the victim compensation process? I know several of these lawyers have probably already worked, but for any who haven't, what that can offer to their clients?
Right. Okay. So CIC it used to be, it's from the Department of Treasury. It most recently, I think, just got privatized by a corporation called Corvell that's out of Brentwood. But it's a fund that can help victims of crime. What's interesting is that for victims of sexual assault, they have a pain and suffering award that is up to $3,000, and it's just for victims of sexual assault. So anyone can fill this out. I know the advocates at SAC, we all go through a training. It's yearly, but it'll go through what they will reimburse, like mental health, if you have mental health bills, any sort of medical bills that stem from the assault. For example, the MLE, the medical legal exam, is covered, but sometimes while you're in the hospital resulting, something else happens, you have to get a CAT scan, you have to get an MRI. those are things that can be compensated as well. So you're not leaving the hospital or leaving SAC with a huge medical bill. But attorneys fill it out. Advocates can fill it out. I think attorneys can also get reimbursed for filling it out. I'm not quite sure that process because I work for a nonprofit. But if you need to ask me, I will find that out for you. But once again, I tell clients it's kind of a process. I kind of treat it like insurance. You're going to throw everything at it and see what they accept and see what they deny, and then go through the appeal process. The claims adjusters are pretty nice. So just there's calling them, hounding them, asking what they need. For the sexual assault, $3,000 award, most of the things that you need, you just have to have a police report. And that police report has to have the nature of the crime that was reported. It also, and you can, even though it's an ongoing investigation, I know for Metro Records, they'll release it to the victim, or they will release it to the attorney, just the front page to drop off. So then after that, the DA will fill out a form. The victim has to report within 48 hours to the police and has to work with the police. So that's it. It covers more than that, but for sexual assault specific victims, that's a huge, they can do a lot with that money. I had a client who got a new sofa because that was where her assault happened. So looking at that sofa all day long drove her up the wall, and that's what she used her money on. So it's I don't know if a lot of people know about it, but it's something that could help.
Awesome, thank you. I know we increased the victims' compensation a couple of years ago, but hopefully we can get some more money for reimbursements and things like that in future years. It seems very important. How that story you highlighted about the couch too, I think is a huge thing for a survivor who's living in a space where their assault may have occurred. So glad that service is available. Mindy, before we turn to Q&A, I'd like to turn back to you just for a minute. I think a lot of people are curious about your experience with the clemency process, and I know your story intimately because we worked together for the last 2 years, but can you tell a little bit about, just the different steps in what you did to advocate for yourself? And I know your story and a lot of your success was centered around owning your story and, pushing your story and getting it out there for people to hear and kind of taking that back and talking openly about the abuses that you suffered. So could you just kind of give the audience a summary of the steps that you took to make all of this possible?
Well, my experience as a sexual abuse survivor was frustrating to begin with, because I continued to feel that there was no help available for me to prove this allegation of abuse. It seemed that even though I found people that knew this was wrong, no one was willing to help me without paying thousands of dollars that I didn't have. However, I still clung to the hope that I would find someone. So eventually I just began to, just search. And after all my appeals were exhausted and I couldn't find anyone to help me, I filed for my clemency. And by the grace of God, my clemency was accepted. I had my hearing. They recommended for immediate parole eligibility. And during that process, I came into contact with Free Hearts and the Love and Justice Project, which they were very supportive of me by helping reach out to people to sign on petitions for me to the governor, and just, they were so supportive. And with that being said, I ended up, when the governor signed off on my petition, December the 2nd, 2021, I had a parole hearing in February of 2022. And of course I was granted parole, and I'm just blessed to be here. It was just a long, hard road, and something that I wouldn't want any sexual abuse survivor to have to go through. I just want I just want there to be some help available for people like myself.
Yeah, and I think, Mindy, what I've been so impressed by you is not just your continued fight and how you didn't lose hope over the years, but your ability to advocate for yourself in these situations. One thing that I think your clemency case had that not a lot of other cases have, I mean, you saw Centoya Brown's clemency case had a lot of public support because she had Kim Kardashian, a lot of celebrities. Your clemency case didn't have that, but I do think your clemency case had something that not a lot of other cases had, which was support of legislators. So can you talk a little bit about some of the legislators that you came into contact, how you got connected, what they were able to help you work through the process, how they communicated with you? Can you talk a little bit about your work with the legislators?
Yes, Senator Jackson and Senator Jackson was the first one that I met. I think Heather had told him about my situation and he came to see me. And he was just very supportive. He talked about, my situation, and he couldn't believe what I had been through. So he was very supportive in speaking, on my behalf to the governor's office. And then Mr. Paul Rose and Miss Moody came to see me along with Senator Jackson. And I just let them know, I want to do all that I can to help others not to end up like myself. I want to be a voice that I never had. But they've just been awesome. They've been very supportive of anything that I needed or.
Yeah, I thought it was beautiful how you were able to build that relationship with Senator Jackson. He came out and visited you. Y'all had some great connection, and then you stayed in touch with him. I mean, you called him weekly. You wrote him.
I did. I called him weekly, even though it might have been for 5 or 10 minutes at a time. We still spoke weekly.
Yeah, and that was a long process for 2 years. I think your commitment to building those relationships and finding people on the outside who would advocate for you was probably the most contributing reason why you were successful.
Well, I feel honored that I finally had people that wanted to stand behind me and support me.
Yes. Any closing thoughts from you all on advice that you would like to give attorneys who are working with survivors, things that you think might be helpful for any attorney to know when they're working with survivors of assault?
Well, I can leave with one piece of advice for those of you that are working with the survivors. Just let them know that their voice needs to be heard, that they need to know that they matter and what they went through is very wrong. And most of all, it's not their fault. They didn't cause the abuse. And it's very important to know that they know that someone will help them.
Thank you, Mindy. Yeah. Kelly or Betsy, any kind of advice for attorneys in this space?
I think just reaching out if they have any questions. We don't expect everybody to be experts in everything. And so you've got people here that you can reach out to if you have any questions or if you need any help, or if you have somebody that you think would benefit from more services or from more support, just reach out. Betsy and I, we have a long history of doing this work, and yeah, if it's legal stuff, send them to Betsy. If it's therapy or advocacy, send them to me, and we'll make sure that they get what they need.
I don't know. I just recently thought about this. I know we work at nonprofits and a lot of us have economic guidelines that we have to keep, but I find that sometimes these nonprofits are the best ways to be knowledgeable about this area. And I don't know how many people on here are private attorneys who deal, with people who aren't aware, who are lucky enough to hire a private attorney, but aren't aware of some of the nonprofits that are just super knowledgeable about this area who, if you don't fit into our program, we can refer you to someone else. Like this network, it's a good network. We kind of know everyone. And so being able to refer to find that place that fits for you, just keep us in mind.
Yeah, and speaking of that, Betsy, I mean, you two work for the leading organizations supporting survivors of sexual assault, but there are some other groups or resources. Are there anybody else that you would recommend, or any other orgs that work on related issues to sexual assault that you would recommend? Any other resources that you would recommend for the lawyers on the call?
I mean, I think it depends. There's a wide variety. You got to give me, a hint of like, what do they need? Shelter? Is it that, they need, is it someone you're working with who's homeless? Like those who needs healthcare? Like those are all things that we can find those answers for you. But I think my biggest suggestion is hit me up with a hypothetical and let me see what I can find.
And I know that the coalition on their website has maps for any lawyers across the state where they can find their local shelters, their local advocate centers. I'm sure on the sexual assault website, there's also resources and other organizations that are related to this work that can help if people need to.
Right. And
Kelly dropped her information in the chat. Thank you, Kelly. And then I'm just there was one question in the chat where Trina said they've been encouraged to delay when filing victims' compensation claims because those claims are discoverable by the defendant and could interfere with a criminal case. Can anyone speak to that? That concern of being encouraged to delay those compensation claims?
it is true. If there is if you can name your abuser, sometimes you can't. If you can name your abuser, they will notify him at some point. But I would urge to keep that deadline in the back of your mind. I think it got extended to 2 years. It's either a year or 2 years after the report that you have to file for this claim. It's different if you're a minor, but keep that in mind. Sometimes too, the need for money and to get that ball rolling as quick as possible is going, it's a balance, which one's more important, which one are you going to do first?
Thank you. Kelly, anything you want to add to that or?
No, just, yeah, it did. The deadline has gotten extended, which has been a huge help. And part of the reason why it got extended was because so many attorneys were being asked to hold off and advocates are being asked to hold off on filing. And so because of that, it was able to get extended for another year. So that helped.
Heather, I can speak to that. I work at the district attorney's office and actually had a case involving a woman and her statements. I mean, yes, they are discoverable. The defense attorney requested her statements and we provided them and he used them to impeach her and he's doing his job. That's allowable. But to answer the question, yes, they are. And if the incident happens here in Nashville and we are able to find the perpetrator or the perpetrator is known, then just due to the deadline, we don't, if you process it through the district attorney's office in Nashville, that deadline is looming. And so we don't typically delay that. It just is what it is. If a woman writes down the statement and there are minor discrepancies in what she may have written in an order of protection or what she may have, the officer may have taken from her and placed in the affidavit, it's part of the legal system. But the defense attorney can get them. Sometimes they don't ask, but this defense attorney was definitely on his game and requested those. And so we turned it over. I had a question for Mindy. Heather, if you don't mind, can I jump in?
Of course, yeah.
there's a saying in life, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and it almost sounds like a person in your position, you need to have an advocate or someone in the system who can tell your story and go to a legislature. I'm just interested in how you got connected with that specific, I don't know if he was a state senator or state rep that you were having the phone calls with on a weekly basis. Who made that connection for you? And if you did not have that connection, do you think that you would have been successful in this process?
Heather was the one that introduced my story to him, because her and I had spoke over numerous times and written. I believe that if I hadn't have had them, I can't say whether or not I would have been successful or not. But I still, I'm still in the process of trying to clear my name because of the abuse that I went through.
Yeah, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, Jenny.
And let me ask you one more follow-up. Who connected you with Heather?
Well, the Love and Justice Project connected me with Heather.
Okay.
Yeah,
Miss Alexander Chambers connected me with her.
yeah.
Okay. Was he visiting with you? Would he come into the prison? Is that how you met him?
Well, actually, he set up a visit to come see me after he had heard my story about the abuse that I had endured and everything. And so he set up a visit and he came and visited me.
That's wonderful.
That was
It
Senator
sounds
Jackson.
like it was very serendipitous.
Yes.
That was Senator Jackson that came and visited you, Mindy. I think Jenny was asking about Alex. And
Oh, Alexander Chambers. She and I had emailed and spoke on the phone, and I got to meet with her. The first meeting I got to see her was at my initial parole hearing. But she's the one that connected me with Heather, and then Heather connected me with Senator Jackson.
And how was the parole board receptive to you? Did you receive any pushback from any of the members, or were they open to hearing your story?
They were very open to hearing my story. They just couldn't understand how the way my story was, why it wasn't brought out. And they felt like it was basically an injustice toward me because it wasn't brought out.
Yeah.
yeah, Jeannie, I was thinking, talking about Centoya in comparison to Mindy's case. I mean, Centoya had celebrities, Mindy had a lobbyist that she connected with. Not everybody has those two things. But I do think another thing that's important to take away from Mindy's story as a survivor on the inside was she reached out to these orgs. She reached out to Free Hearts. They connected her with the Love and Justice Project, who connected her with Alex, then me, then Senator Jackson. It was kind of a chain effect, but a domino effect. But those orgs, the Sexual Assault Center, the Coalition, these hotlines, these orgs are out there to provide support for victims at all stages of the process. So whether you're a victim who's working with the DA's office, they have their own victim witness coordinator, whether you're a victim who is going through a civil process with a private attorney, whether you're a victim that's a criminal defendant, these organizations are out there doing great work, helping survivors process and heal from trauma. And those services are available and accessible to people all throughout the legal system. So I hope that's the big takeaway from today, is that there are groups out there working, and everyone is deserving of healing that has been victimized throughout our legal system. So I hope that people walk away with the understanding that these advocates can be super beneficial when working with sexual assault survivors in the legal system. So any closing or anything else you guys would like to say? I just want to thank you all for being here today. You're all experts in your field and are passionate advocates, and I'm super grateful for you having the conversation. So thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
All right. Anything else, Jenny, before we jump off? Awesome. Well, thank you all for coming. I hope it was helpful. Betsy and Kelly dropped their information in the chat if anybody would like to use them as a resource. And thank you all for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.